Imogen Sinclair crossed the whole length of the Founders Hall to claim me. 300 of the oldest names in the university seated between us under the founders' portraits and the brass chandeliers, a centenary convocation in full gown and procession. My own 4-year-old standing copper-haired and wide-eyed at the foot of the dais, and the woman's own mother on her feet at the lectern in the middle of having me branded a fraud and removed from the hall. Professor Imogen Sinclair, the coldest chair in the faculty, and the one woman every junior scholar in that hall had been raised to be afraid of, set down the citation she had just been handed to read, stepped away from the lectern her family had endowed, walked the long aisle to the research assistant her mother had paid 4 years ago to disappear, and said the sentence that cracked a 100-year ceremony down to its stone floor. That child by the dais is mine.
Hi everyone! Thank you for staying with me. Subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. Stay close, stay connected.
I'm going to tell you how an assistant in a borrowed gown ended up being claimed, with the daughter they had all been told never existed, in front of the people who had been paid to keep her invisible. But you have to let me go back, because nothing about that convocation makes sense until you understand the 4 years I spent raising a child whose other mother had been told I took money and ran. If you want the uncensored, too hot for YouTube version of this story, the parts I cannot tell here, it is on my Patreon, link in the description. Tell us where you are watching from. And subscribe. My name is Della Merritt, and I read hands, not palms. I am not that kind of reader, and this is not that kind of story. I read the written hand, the ink and the angle and the pressure of it, the old letters and older manuscripts that come into a great university's archive brown and cracked and lying about themselves. I am a translator and a reader of documents, the woman they bring a water-stained page to when no one can say who wrote it or when or whether it is true. Most people who do my work do it with training and patience and a very good lamp, and they do it beautifully, and the archive catalogs the page and no one thinks of the hand. I did all of that too. But I also did the other thing, the thing I have never once been able to put in a footnote, the thing that made me, by 26, quietly the best reader of an old hand in the building, and just as quietly the easiest woman in it to send out a side door without a reference. I can read a hand. I do not know how else to say it so that it does not sound like a parlor trick, and it is not one. Put a written page in front of me, the slope and catch of the ink, the places the writer pressed hard and the places they lifted, and I can read, somewhere behind my sternum in a place that has no name, the truth of the hand that made it. Not the words. Anyone can read the words. The thing under the words, whether one hand wrote it or two, whether the date it claims is the date the ink remembers, whether the confession at the bottom was set down by the same person who wrote the top, or added later by someone else, pressing too lightly because they were pretending to be calm. A hand carries everything that has happened to the person making it, every fear, every lie told with the wrist, and I can read it the way you read a face across a table. They cannot teach this. You either feel the hand telling the truth or you do not, and I have felt it since I was a girl at my grandmother's elbow. And it has made me, by 26, quietly remarkable and just as quietly invisible, which in my experience are almost always the same woman. I want to show you the gift before I tell you what it cost, because otherwise it is only a claim, and I have spent my whole life refusing to be only a claim. Years ago, I was the lowest assistant in a city archive, and one winter, a famous collector brought in a letter said to be written by the founder of the very university I will be telling you about, a letter worth a wing of a building. And the whole department leaned over it with their loupes and began to believe it. I read it once. I read the hand leaning wrong, the confidence in the downstrokes that the real founder's nervous hand never had, the iron in the ink sitting too bright for its claimed 200 years. I said quietly that the letter was a forgery and a good one, and not even an old one. A senior man told me to catalog the genuine items and leave the scholarship to scholars. 6 months later, a chemist confirmed the ink, and the letter was withdrawn in disgrace, and the senior man wrote the cautionary article and was praised for his rigor, and no one ever knew that the lowest assistant in the room had read the whole lie in an afternoon. That is the gift and that is the curse. The same woman, the same hour. I am right and I am invisible. And being right is worth nothing if you have made yourself too small to be believed. When you say the thing in everyone's hands is a lie. My grandmother is the reason I can do it, and she is the reason you are going to believe the rest, so let me set her down properly. She raised me. My mother was a name on the back of a postcard, and nothing more. And she had been the letter reader and the letter writer for a whole valley of people who had never been taught to read or write their own. For 50 years, they came to her, one room with their official papers and their soldiers' letters and their bank demands. And she read the truth out of them and wrote the answers back. And somewhere in those years, she learned to read, not just the words, but the hand. Which debt notice was a bluff? Which loving letter was written by a man already lying? Which signature on a poor family's contract had been added by the landlord himself? She had a brass reading glass worn smooth at the rim from 50 years in her grip. And the first true memory I have of being myself is her folding my two small fingers around that warm brass and teaching me the only thing I have ever really believed. A hand can be forged, Della. What it meant cannot. People will lie to you on paper your whole life. She made it ordinary, the way I could look at a page and know the person. You just listen with your eyes. Most folk are too busy reading the words to read the hand. And I understand now that the ordinariness was the kindest, most protective thing she could have done, because she had seen what powerful people do to a poor girl who is gifted out loud. She read letters until her eyes would not hold the lines. And then she sat by our one window and got smaller. And the night before she died, she folded my fingers around the warm brass the way she had when I was small and said, "People will spend your whole life telling you what you are, Della. An assistant. Only an assistant. The help with ink on her hands. Don't believe a word of it." When she died, I was 19, and the only thing I took from her one room was that brass glass. And I have not read a single page without it on the table beside me for 7 years. Remember the glass. It comes back the way the truth always does. So that is the shape of me when the Sinclair name first reached down into my small life, the best reader of a written hand in the building, and the cheapest and the most disposable. A woman who could feel a forgery an afternoon early, and had spent her whole life learning that the feeling was worth nothing, unless someone with a title decided to spend their own standing on it. I told myself I had made my peace with being right and invisible. I had not made my peace with anything. I had just gotten very good at looking like a woman who had. And then a posting went up for a translator in the manuscript archive of a famous old university 300 miles from the city, where it had all gone wrong. A quiet job reading old hands in a quiet library, and I needed it the way you need a thing when you have a 4-year-old asleep in the next room and 40 pounds left in the world. And I did not let myself read too closely whose university it was until I had already signed. I have to tell you about my daughter now before anything else, because she is the whole reason the rest of it costs what it costs. Her name is Pia, and she was 4 that autumn, and she has copper hair like mine and gray eyes that are not mine at all. Gray like a particular winter sky, gray I had spent 4 years not letting myself think too hard about. And she is, the way every mother says and the way it happens to be true, the best thing, the smallest part of my life ever made. I had her alone, above a launderette on a translator's scraps, and I raised her alone. And I told no one in the world whose child she was. And I taught her letters before she could properly hold the pencil, because I could not help it. She made her D's backwards for a year, and I never corrected the joy out of it. She is the reason I signed the posting without reading it closely. She is the reason I am brave enough to tell you any of this at all. The university was called Ashmore, and it was the kind of old that has stopped being about money and started being about names carved into stone. A manuscript library 4 stories deep in brass lamps and oak, and the smell of old leather and older paper. An archive so famous that scholars flew across the world to sit a single afternoon with a single page. I arrived in October with 1 suitcase and 1 child, and 1 brass reading glass. And I told myself it was only a library, only old hands and good lamps, only the thing I was best at in the world finally being paid for in a place too grand to notice me. I did not let myself look up at the lintel over the library doors until I was already inside and already employed. And when I did look up, I read the name carved into the stone, and I had to put my hand flat against the cold oak of the door to keep from sitting down on the steps. Sinclair. The library was the Sinclair Library. I had walked my daughter 300 miles and signed my name to the one building in the world, with her other mother's name cut a foot high into the stone above the door. I want to be honest about the cowardice of the next hour, because I think you have had an hour like it. I did not turn around. I stood in the staff cloakroom with my coat half off and did the arithmetic that poor women do. The arithmetic of 40 pounds and a 4-year-old and a posting already signed, and I told myself it was a big university, that a manuscript archive was not a faculty office, that I could read old hands 4 stories underground for a year and never once come within 100 yards of the name on the door made flesh. I was right about the architecture of a place like Ashmore, which exists precisely to keep an assistant and a chair from ever sharing a room. I was wrong about everything else, the way you are always wrong about everything else, because the universe that takes the trouble to carve a name over a door does not do it so that you can avoid the name. The man who hired me, the only person at Ashmore who ever once treated me as though I were entirely real, was the night archivist, and his name was Mr. Pell. He was past 70 and going blind in the slow, patient way of a man who has used his eyes too well for too long. A milky gray creeping in at the edges of a gaze that had read more old hands than anyone alive. And he ran the deep archive in the late hours when the scholars had gone up to dinner. He watched me read a page my first night, a charred 15th century letter that 3 senior fellows had argued over for a decade. And he watched me set my grandmother's brass glass on the table and go still over it. And after a while I said, without meaning to say it aloud, that the letter had been written by 2 people, the body by one and the signature by another, years apart. And that was why it had never made sense. He did not praise me. He did the rarer thing. He believed me the first night before I had earned it. Remember Mr. Pell. He is holding something for me the whole time, down in the dark, and he does not tell me he has it until the very last hour. I met Imogen Sinclair on my 9th day, and I had been so careful, and it happened anyway. I was carrying a tray of folios up the back stair because the lift was broken, and she was coming down it. And there is a turn in that stone stairwell where 2 people cannot pass without one stopping. And I stopped. And I looked up, and 4 years fell away under me like a trapdoor. She had not changed the way I had changed. Power does not age a woman the way fear does. Jet black hair gone to a single thread of gray at one temple. Gray eyes. Pia's gray. My daughter's gray. Looking at me out of a stranger's cold face. A black fountain pen clipped at her breast that I knew, that I had watched her uncap and recap 10,000 times in a life I no longer had. She looked at me the way you look at a member of staff you are waiting to let you pass. She did not know me. I had been the most important person in one autumn of her life, and she stood 18 inches from me and did not know my face. And I understood in that second exactly how complete the lie she had been told must have been. Because you do not forget a face like that unless someone has worked very hard to bury it for you. I stepped aside and let her pass, and did not breathe until her steps had gone down into the dark. And then I put my back against the cold stone and shook, quietly, the way I have learned to shake so that no one can see it. She did not know me. I had spent 4 years building a life around the certainty that Imogen Sinclair had looked at a pregnant 19-year-old's confession and her mother's money, and made a cold, rich woman's choice. And she had just walked past the mother of her child with the clean, empty face of a woman who has been told a completely different story than the one that is true. I did not understand it yet. I only felt it, the way I feel a forged clause, the wrongness of it, the sense that somewhere in what had happened to me, there was a hand pressing too hard and pretending to be calm. I picked up the tray and went back to work and told myself I had imagined the wrongness. I had not. I never do. Now I have to take you back because you cannot understand the cold woman on the stair until you have met the warm one underneath her. And there was a warm one 4 years ago, and I am one of perhaps 3 people alive who ever saw her. I came to Ashmore the first time at 22, on the one scholarship the university gives to people like me. A poor, brilliant girl with a freakish gift for old hands and nothing to lose, and I was assigned, because the gift was real, to the research circle of the most formidable scholar in the manuscript field in the country, Professor Imogen Sinclair, 33 years old, already a legend, already cold, the youngest chair the university had ever made, and the most feared. The other students were terrified of her. I was not, and I have thought a great deal about why. And I think it is simply that I had been raised by a woman who read frightened hands for a living, and I could see from the first week that Imogen Sinclair was the most frightened person in every room she froze, and that the cold was not the absence of feeling, but a wall built very carefully around far too much of it. The thing between us happened the way the true things do, slowly and then all at once and over old paper. She gave me the manuscripts no one else could read, the charred ones, the hands so damaged that reading them was less scholarship than seance, and she watched me read them with a hunger she did not know was on her face. The hunger of a brilliant, lonely person discovering they are not, after a lifetime, the only one of their kind in the world. We worked late, the faculty emptied. We sat in her firelit study with a 1,000-year-old hand between us, and she stopped, somewhere in that autumn, talking to me like a chair to an assistant, and started talking to me like a frightened woman to the one person who had ever read her write. She was 33 and I was 22, and we were both adults, and it was not the scandal her mother later built. It was the realest thing either of us had ever been allowed. She told me once, with her guard all the way down, that she had been raised to believe that being loved and being safe were opposite things, and that she had chosen safe at 18 and never once stopped being lonely. She uncapped her dead father's black pen and wrote in the back of my notebook, in the most disciplined hand in the faculty gone suddenly unsteady, a single line of an old poem about a lamp left burning in a window. And she did not sign it, and I have it still. She was not the frost they all feared. She was a woman who had been frozen on purpose, and for one season she thawed for me. Her mother is Provost Lavinia Sinclair, and I need you to see her clearly, because she is the hand pressing too hard under everything that broke me. The Provost is the most powerful person at Ashmore, not a scholar, a sovereign, the woman who runs the whole 100-year machine of the place, who decides which names go on which buildings and which inconvenient people are quietly unmade. She had built her cold daughter into the jewel of the dynasty, and she had a match already chosen for her, a suitable alliance with a polished, honey-haired scholar called Saskia Vell, who came from the right people and would make the right marriage. And then her frozen jewel of a daughter thawed in one autumn for a penniless scholarship girl with ink on her cuffs and no name worth carving anywhere. And the Provost did what sovereigns do to inconvenient weather. She did not rage. People like the Provost never rage. She simply, quietly, with the full machinery of a 100-year institution in her hand, set about making me disappear in a way that would leave her daughter's cold intact and her dynasty story clean. Here is how she did it, and I did not know the half of it until the very last hour in the Founders Hall. The translation that made Imogen Sinclair's famous career, the rendering of a charred manuscript 3 centuries of scholars had called unreadable, the one in every footnote, was mine. I read it that autumn, the whole impossible burned hand of it, in her firelit study, and we did it together the way we did everything, and it was going to be ours. Both our names, the first time my name would have been on anything. The Provost saw the danger early and cold, so she built the cruelest forgery I have ever been near. She had a charge of plagiarism drawn up against me for stealing the very translation I had made, a fabricated record claiming I had copied my work from an obscure source, with a confession at the bottom in what was meant to be my hand, admitting the theft and agreeing to withdraw quietly. I never wrote that confession. I never saw it until it was 4 years old. But it was good enough to ruin a girl with no name and no money and no one to believe her. And that is all a forgery has to be. They brought me into a paneled room with 3 faces in it and told me with great regret that there was a charge and proof and a confession, and that for the good of everyone, for the good, they said, of Professor Sinclair, whose name would otherwise be dragged through it, I would sign the withdrawal, take the scholarship money already drawn in my name, and be gone by morning with no public stain and no reference. I was 22. I had no one. The confession on the table was in a hand so close to mine that for 1/6 I doubted my own memory, until the gift rose up in me even through the terror, and I felt the wrongness of it, the press of a forger's careful wrist. And I knew it was a lie, and I also knew, with the despair of the poor, that knowing a thing and proving it to a room that has already decided are not remotely the same. So I did the one free thing left to me. I refused the money. I tore the check they had drawn in my name in half on the paneled table in front of the 3 faces, because if they were going to call me a thief, I would not let them also make it true. And I walked out into the dark with my brass glass and nothing else, too proud to be bought, and I did not yet know I was carrying her child. I left without seeing her, and that is the part that took me 4 years to forgive in myself. I was so certain, so young, and so poor and so certain that Imogen Sinclair must have known that a charge could not be built in her own faculty without her hand in it, that her silence could only mean she had chosen the dynasty and let them throw me to it. I believed she had looked at the cost of me and paid it, so I did not go to her. I got on a coach in the dark and I left Ashmore, and 3 weeks later, in a launderette flat 300 miles away, I learned that the autumn had left me something her mother could not tear up. And still, I did the proud, poor thing I have gone over 10,000 times since. I wrote her one letter. One. I told her about the child. I sent it, and I waited, and no answer ever came. And I took the silence as the last word. And I raised my daughter believing her other mother had read the news of her and chosen, again, the cold. Remember the letter? It is the cruelest thing in this whole story. And it is not cruel in the way I thought, because the letter never reached her. The Provost's machinery did not stop at the paneled room. A woman who will forge a confession will certainly open a letter. My one letter, my child, my whole proud, heartbroken news, went into the Provost's hand and never came out of it. And what came out instead was the story they told my daughter's other mother and let her believe for 4 years. They told Imogen that I had confessed, that the plagiarism was real, that I had stolen the Great Translation, that when I was caught I had taken the scholarship money and signed and vanished without a word, a thief and a fraud who had used her. They let the coldest, most frightened woman in the faculty believe that the one person who had ever read her write had been a liar the whole time. They did not just steal my name and my child from me. They stole me from her and replaced me with a thief and let her grieve the thief for 4 years, while never once telling her there had been a child and a real woman under all of it. That is what I walked back into, under the carved name, with the child in my hand. I just did not know it yet. So I went back to work the morning after she passed me on the stair without a flicker. And I did the thing poor, proud women do, which is I got very good very fast at a job in a place that did not know my history. I read the great damaged hands of the Sinclair archive 12 hours a day, and I was extraordinary at it. And almost no one above the basement knew my name. And that suited me. That was the old bargain of being right and invisible I had been making my whole life. What I had not reckoned on, what you can never reckon on, was that the work itself would betray me, because the best reader of an old hand in the building cannot stay in the basement forever, when the building's most famous scholar has hit a manuscript she cannot read. There was a manuscript. There is always a manuscript. The centerpiece of the centenary the whole university was building toward. A charred codex the founder's Convocation was meant to unveil newly read, and Imogen Sinclair, the greatest reader of old hands the faculty had been stuck on it for a year, and the centenary was bearing down. It was Mr. Pell who did it, with the best of intentions, the way the people who believe in us undo our hiding with love. He went up into the daylight, where he almost never went, and told the Provost's office, plainly, that there was a reader in the basement who could do in a month what the chair had not done in a year. He thought he was giving me my name back. He was. He just did not know that to give me my name back, he had to put me back in the firelit study, across a 1,000-year-old hand from the woman who had been told I was a thief. They summoned me up 4 days later, and I walked back into the room where I had been happiest and most loved at 22. And there she was behind the desk with her father's black pen in her hand. And the provost was there too, standing by the window like a sovereign inspecting a transaction. And Saskia Vell, golden and polished, at the chair's shoulder where I had once stood. And Imogen looked at me, and there was the smallest flicker, the smallest catch in the most disciplined face in the faculty. A frown of someone reaching for a thing they have been told to forget. And then it was gone. And she said, in the cold, even voice I had once watched come apart in firelight, "Mr. Pell tells me you can read what I cannot." So I showed her. They put the charred codex in front of me, the one she had not read in a year, and I set my grandmother's brass glass beside it and went still over it. And the room and the dynasty and the golden rival all fell away, and there was only the burned hand on the page asking to be heard. And I read it, not all of it, but the thread of it, the place where one hand stopped and a frightened second hand took over, the same shape of truth I find in everything. And I said it aloud, plainly, and the room went silent. And when I looked up, Imogen Sinclair was staring at me, with her cold face cracked clean open, because I had just done in 20 minutes the thing she had given a year of her formidable life to, and because I saw it cross her face. And I will go to my grave certain of it, somewhere far under the lie she had been told. The oldest part of her had just recognized the one hand in the world that read like her own. She did not say any of that. She said, after a long moment, "You will work on the codex, here, with me." And the provost said nothing, because she still did not recognize in the basement reader the girl she had unmade 4 years before. That single failure of a sovereign to look closely enough at the help is the hinge. The whole rest of this turns on. The months that followed were the slowest and most dangerous of my life. And the danger was not what you would think. The danger was that the warm woman was still in there, under the cold one and under the lie, and that working a burned hand beside someone night after night is the most intimate thing two readers can do, and that I had loved her, and that I am not made of stone no matter how hard a poor woman learns to look like she is. At first, she was all cold, all show me, prove it, faster, and I let her be, because cold I could survive. But you cannot read a 1,000-year-old hand beside a person for 3 months and stay strangers. And slowly, page by burned page, the old thing came back, the rhythm of two minds that read alike. I would feel the thread of the scribe, and she would catch it half a second behind me, and our eyes would meet over the glass. And for that half second, she was not the frost, and I was not the help. And 4 years and one terrible lie did not exist. Not. She began, without either of us naming it, to thaw. It was that she started having tea brought for 2 instead of 1. It was that the prove it went out of her voice, and a kind of quiet wonder came into it when I read her something true. Because I could not say it. I had a child 3 floors up with this woman's gray eyes, and a ruined name, and no proof. And what I did not have until the last hour, was the one thing that would let me say it and be believed. The original record, the unforged truth, the hand under the hand. I have to tell you about Saskia Vell, because every story like mine has a polished knife in it, and she was mine. Dr. Saskia Vell was the match the provost had chosen. Honey-haired and impeccably credentialed, a competent scholar, and a flawless courtier. The kind of woman who has never once in her life been right about something no one wanted to hear, and has therefore never once been punished for it. She had also, in the 4 years since my unmaking, built a good part of her rising reputation on a series of translations that I knew, the moment I was shown them in the archive, the way I know a forged clause, translations that were mine, my unpublished work from that autumn, lifted from the materials the Provost had seized and quietly fed to her chosen daughter-in-law to launder into a career. Saskia did not know I knew. Saskia did not know me at all. I was the basement reader, a fixture beneath her notice. But I sat across the codex from the woman she intended to marry, and I watched her come in with her golden certainty and put her hand on the back of Imogen's chair. And I read, in the careful brightness of her, a woman who had built everything she had on someone else's stolen hand and had no idea the someone was sitting 8 feet away. And then there was Pia, and Pia is where the danger and the love finally ran into each other, because a 4-year-old does not understand architecture. I kept her in the staff nursery 3 floors up and 3 corridors over, and I told myself the building was big enough, the way I had told myself the building was big enough about her mother, and I was wrong in exactly the same way. It was a wet afternoon when the nursery had a burst pipe, and they brought the children down through the library to the dry reading rooms. And I came up from the archive with a folio in my hands, and came around a corner, and there in the great brass-lit hall was my daughter, copper-haired, gray-eyed, standing very small under the carved name, looking up. And following her gaze, I saw what she was looking at, and my heart stopped. She was looking at a portrait, the faculty portrait of the youngest chair the university had ever made. I got her out of the hall. I do not entirely remember how, only my own voice coming out far too calm. Lots of people have gray eyes, darling. Come and see the big books. And I did not let myself look up to see whether anyone with a title had heard a copper-haired child say that under that particular portrait. No one had, that time. But I went down into the archive and put both hands flat against a cold shelf and understood that the year I had told myself I could survive was a fiction. That you cannot hide a child with a woman's eyes in the building with the woman's name on it. That the truth was not a thing I was keeping, but a thing I was standing in front of with my arms spread. And that arms get tired. Mr. Pell, who saw more with his failing milky eyes than the whole sighted faculty, watched me come out of the stacks white-faced, and watched Pia swing her copper head over a stack of catalogs, and he did not say anything that day. But he started, I think, to do the arithmetic that only he and I could do. The thing that finally cracked it open was the codex, because the truth in the story was always going to come up out of a written hand. And Imogen leaned over the glass and saw it, finally saw it the way I see it. And something happened in her face that was not about the manuscript at all. She went very still and said slowly, "How can you always tell?" And I said the truest thing I had said to her in 4 years. Because frightened people press too hard when they lie, and you can feel the fear in the wrist. The words can lie. And she looked at me a long moment with her father's pen turning over in her fingers, and I watched a question I could not answer rise up behind her gray eyes and go nowhere. And I thought, she is one true page away from asking the right question, and I do not have the page. But Mr. Pell had it. The Deep Archive keeps everything. Every record the Daylight Institution generates, filed and forgotten in the cold rooms below, including the disciplinary records of the faculty, the originals, the true papers before the Daylight versions are made. And Mr. Pell, 4 years before cataloging in the dark, had filed a withdrawn plagiarism record on a scholarship student, and had noticed, with his still good eyes and his 40 years of reading hands, that the confession at the bottom of it was wrong, that it did not match the rest of the file, that the hand was pretending. He had not known what to do with the wrongness. He had filed it and remembered it, the way he remembered everything. And when a copper-haired reader walked into his archive 4 years later and read a forged confession out of a charred manuscript on her first night, he had begun, slowly, to set 2 pages side by side in his mind. He just did not tell me. He was waiting, I think, for me to need it out loud. And the week before the convocation, I finally did. It came apart because Saskia Vell made it come apart, the way the polished knife always overreaches in the end. The provost had decided that the convocation, the great centenary, the unveiling of the Red Codex, would also crown two more things: the formal academic partnership, and soon the marriage, of Imogen Sinclair and Saskia Vell, dynasty to dynasty, and the conferral on Saskia of a fellowship for her body of translation work. The stolen work, my autumn, laundered into a golden woman's honor, and about to be crowned in front of 300 names. And Saskia, who had everything and had earned the smallest part of it, could not quite leave the basement reader alone, because people who build their lives on a stolen hand cannot bear the one person in the room who can read. She came down to the archive the week before, golden and smiling, to make sure the codex would be ready to unveil with the Sinclair name on it. And she looked at the work I had spent 3 months saving her future mother-in-law's reputation with, and she said lightly, "They tell me you're quite the little reader." I should have stayed small. I had stayed small my whole life. It was the bargain. It was survival. But I had a daughter 3 floors up with gray eyes, and I had spent 3 months watching the woman I loved turn the warm side of her face to me over a burned page, and then back to the golden thief who had built a career on my stolen hand. And something in me that had been pressed down for 4 years pressed back. I did not shout. I have never once been able to afford to shout. I just looked up from the glass and said, quietly, in the steady voice I use for telling a room, that the thing in its hands is a lie. I read the translation your fellowship is for. I know whose hand it's in. I do not know what my face was doing. I know hers went white under the gold, and I know she left without another word. And I know that I had just, after a lifetime of being safely invisible, made a powerful, frightened woman aware that I could see her, which is the most dangerous thing a person like me can do, and the bravest. Saskia went to the Provost, of course, and the Provost moved to unmake the inconvenient basement reader the only way a sovereign knows how, cleanly, on paper, before the Convocation could be spoiled. Word came down the next day, through 3 administrative hands, so that none of them had to be the one to say it, that my services would no longer be required after the centenary, that there were questions about my background and a prior record at another institution, that I should collect my things quietly and expect no reference. They were going to use the very lie they had built 4 years ago to throw me out a second time, to make sure the woman who could read Saskia's stolen hand was gone and discredited before she could stand up in any hall. And the worst of it was that it would work, because a forged confession in a file is worth more in a place like Ashmore than the true word of a basement reader with ink on her cuffs, and I knew it, and they knew it, and we were all once again going to pretend it was about scholarship. So I went to Mr. Pell. I had carried the wound alone for 4 years. The proud, poor habit. The thing my grandmother both gave me and cursed me with. And that night, I sat down in the deep archive and for the first time in my life told the whole of it out loud to another human being. The autumn 4 years ago, the translation that was mine, the forged confession, the torn cheque, the child upstairs with the gray eyes, the one letter that was never answered. I told him I had no proof, that I had never had proof, and that I was about to be thrown out a second time on the strength of a 4-year-old lie. And Mr. Pell sat very still in the brass light with his milky, patient eyes, and when I was done, he got up slowly and went back into the cold rooms where the true records sleep, and came back with a thin file gone soft at the edges, and set it in front of me and said, "I have been keeping this for 4 years, child, and I did not know until tonight that it was yours. Read your own confession. Read it with your glass." I put my grandmother's brass glass over the confession that had ruined my life, the first time I had seen it since I was 22, and too terrified to look properly. And I read it the way she taught me, and the whole forgery came up off the page at me like heat off a fire. It was not my hand. It was a careful, frightened, practiced imitation of my hand. But the wrist that made it press too hard, exactly where a forger's wrist always does. The downstrokes a confident hand pretending to be a nervous one. And the ink, Mr. Pell had kept the original, and the original ink had aged, and I could read in the age of it that the confession had been written weeks after the date it claimed, by someone with access to the file, in a hand that was not afraid of being caught because it had a whole institution behind it. I knew that pressure. I had been reading it as wrongness on the stair and in the study for months without letting myself name it. It was the Provost's hand, the same too calm, too powerful wrist that signs the citations and endows the halls had sat down one night 4 years ago and forged a frightened girl's confession to a crime that was actually a gift. And then Mr. Pell gave me the second thing, the thing that turned a defense into a reckoning. And he laid down beside the forged confession a single letter, opened long ago and resealed in the archive's cold, honest filing. A letter 4 years old, addressed in a young, poor, frightened hand to Professor Imogen Sinclair, that had been intercepted in the Provost's office and never delivered, and because the deep archive keeps everything, never destroyed either. My letter, my one letter, the one I wrote from the launderette flat to tell her about the child, the letter I had taken 4 years of silence to be the answer to. It had never been opened by the woman I sent it to. It had been opened by her mother, read and buried. The silence I had built my daughter's whole life around was not Imogen's silence at all. It was the Provost. For 4 years, the mother of my child had grieved a thief, and never once been told there was a letter or a child or a truth, because a sovereign had opened an envelope and decided. I want to tell you, I felt triumph, but what I felt first was grief. 4 years of the wrong grief turning over into the right grief all at once. She had not chosen the cold over me. She had been lied to as completely as I had, more completely, because at least I had known what I lost, and she had been handed a thief to hate so that she would never go looking for the woman to love. And then, under the grief, slowly, the other thing came up, the thing my grandmother put in me with the warm brass, that a hand can be forged, but what it meant cannot, that the truth holds in the wrist for anyone brave enough and quiet enough to read it out loud, and that I was, after a whole life of being right and invisible, finally holding the one page that could make me both right and believed. The convocation was in 4 days. The whole 100-year machine would be in that hall, and for the first time in my life, I was going to refuse to be small in front of it. Mr. Pell said he would be there, in the dark at the back, with the original records, and he asked me the question I had felt him not asking for months. When you walk in there, child, are you walking into the worst night of your life, or the first night of the rest of it? The Founders' Convocation of Ashmore's centenary was held in the Great Hall under 100 years of portraits, and I have never been in a room so full of names and so empty of anyone who knew mine. 300 of them in their gowns, the regents and the chairs and the donors whose families had carved themselves into the stone, candle and brass, and the cold gold light of an institution celebrating its own permanence. I came in at the back, in the procession of junior staff in our borrowed gowns, with Mr. Pell's soft-edged file held flat against my chest under the gown, and my grandmother's brass glass warm in my fist, and I found the thing I had dreaded and could not prevent. Pia. The staff nursery did not run during the convocation, and I had no one in the world, and so my daughter was there too, copper-haired in her best small cardigan, sitting with the other staff children at the very foot of the dais, directly beneath the lectern from which the Provost of Ashmore was about to crown a thief and brand me a fraud. My whole life, the two halves of it, in one stone hall, under the carved name with the sovereign on her feet. I watched it begin the way you watch weather you cannot stop. The Provost rose to the lectern, magnificent and cold and entirely certain, and the centenary unfolded according to her design, the great codex, unveiled, newly read by me, in 3 months, in the basement, though my name was nowhere in the citation. Then the fellowship, and Saskia Vell rose golden from her seat to be crowned for my stolen autumn. and I felt the old press down thing press back so hard I had to hold the edge of the bench. And then, because of sovereign tidies, the provost came to the last item, the small administrative cruelty folded into the great occasion. And she said, in her even citation reading voice, that it had regrettably come to light that a member of the junior archive staff carried a prior record of academic dishonesty at another institution, and that the individual, and she said my name out loud in that hall for the first time, not knowing it was the name of the girl she had unmade, would be dismissed without reference, effective tonight. 300 faces turned mildly to find the disgraced help, and I stood up. I stood up in my borrowed gown, a basement reader with ink on her cuffs in a hall full of carved names, and the whole architecture of the place waited for me to apologize or weep or flee, because that is what the help does. Instead, I walked out of the procession of junior staff and into the open floor of the hall, past the turning faces, toward the dais and the lectern and the sovereign, and I heard my own voice come out steady and carrying in a way I did not know it could. I said, "Before you dismiss me, Provost, I would like to read something out loud. It is what I do." I read hands. The provost's even face did not move, because sovereigns do not move, but I read the wrist of her hand where it gripped the lectern, and I saw the fear come up in it, the first fear I had ever seen in that powerful, too calm hand, and I knew that she had finally, 4 years too late, recognized the girl she had buried. I held up the forged confession first, and I told the hall what it was, and then I read it to them. Not the words, the hand. I told them, with the proof held up in the brasslet air, that the confession was a forgery, that the signature was an imitation pressed too hard by a frightened, practiced wrist, that the ink had aged to a date weeks later than the date it claimed, that it had been written by someone with the power and the access to do it cleanly, and that the work it accused me of stealing had in fact been mine, stolen from me, and that I could prove every word of it by the hand, because the hand cannot lie even when the whole machine of a place like this decides that it can. The hall had gone utterly silent, and into that silence I turned with the second paper and did the thing the provost had spent 4 years making certain could never happen. I held up my own unopened letter, 4 years old, addressed in a poor girl's frightened hand to Professor Imogen Sinclair, and I said, "And this is a letter I wrote 4 years ago to a woman in this room that she never received because it was opened in the provost's office and buried in the dark." I have read a great many faces in my life, and I will spend the rest of it trying and failing to describe the one I read on Imogen Sinclair in that moment. She had risen halfway from the seat of honor. Her father's black pen had fallen out of her hand onto the stone floor, and she had not noticed. She was looking at me, really looking, for the first time since the stare, the lie cracking off her face in sheets. And then her eyes went, helplessly, to the foot of the dais, to the copper-haired child in the best small cardigan, who had stood up among the staff children to see what her mother was doing out on the open floor, and who was looking back up at the woman rising from the seat of honor with her own gray eyes in her small round face. The whole hall followed that look. 300 carved names turned from me to the child to the chair and back, and you could hear it move through them. The arithmetic, the impossible sum, the gray eyes and the gray eyes. And Imogen Sinclair looked at her daughter for the first time in the child's life and made a small, broken, undisciplined sound and stepped down off the dais. The provost tried to stop it because sovereigns always try, right up until the floor opens. She said sharply into the lectern that this was a disgraceful performance, that the woman was a proven fraud trying to extort a great family, that security should remove her and the child at once. And for one breath, the old machinery almost turned over, the reflex of 300 people trained to believe the lectern over the floor. And then Imogen Sinclair, who had not raised her voice in the 4 years I had been gone, or in most of the years before, raised it. Just that, once, but it went off in that stone room like a struck bell, the frost of the faculty spending the cold all at once, and the machinery stopped. And into the silence she said, not to the hall, but to me, across the open floor, in a voice gone wholly undisciplined at last. Is it true? The letter. She... And she could not finish it. The greatest reader of hands in the faculty, unable to read the only page that had ever mattered, so I gave her the truth the plain way. I said, her name is Pia. She is 4. She has your eyes, and she draws her letters backwards, and I wrote to tell you the week I found out, and you never got to know. I'm sorry. I thought you chose not to come. She crossed the hall to me, 300 of the oldest names in the university between us, and she crossed all of it, past the fallen pen and the frozen provost and the golden thief gone gray-faced in her crowning. And she stopped in front of the basement reader her mother had paid to disappear. And for a moment, she just looked at me as though she were reading me, finally, the way I had always read her. And then she turned to face the hall, and she put herself deliberately between me and the lectern, between my child and the sovereign. And she said the words that cracked 100-year ceremony down to its stone floor. That child by the dais is mine. This woman wrote every word my name is famous for, and the work you were about to honor tonight was stolen from her, and the confession you were about to dismiss her on was forged in this university by someone in this room. She is not the fraud. The provost made one last move, because that is what the powerful do at the very end. They reach for the only language they have ever spoken. In the chaos breaking open across the hall, she came down off the dais and crossed to me, and low and fast and still, somehow even. She made me the offer she had made me 4 years before in the paneled room. A number, a large one, a settlement, a check to be drawn in the morning if I would only stop reading, stop speaking, take the money and the child and go, and let the 100-year story stay clean. She held it out to me in front of the wreckage of her own convocation, still certain even now that a poor woman with ink on her cuffs has a price, because she had never once met one who did not. And I did the thing I had done at 22, the one free thing, except this time I was not alone and not unproven and not afraid. I did not even raise my voice. I said, I tore the first one in half on a paneled table 4 years ago, and I have never once regretted being too poor to be bought. Put it away, you don't have enough. And then it was over, the way these things are over, not cleanly but completely. The machine that had been certain of itself for 100 years, simply unable to keep running once the truth had been read aloud in its own hall by the one person it had been most careful to keep silent. The regents would spend months on it. The forged record, the stolen fellowship, the intercepted letter, the provost who had done it all to keep a daughter cold and a dynasty clean. And Saskia Vell's golden career came apart in the slow public way that stolen things come apart, once someone has named the true hand. And the provost's 100-year sovereignty ended not in rage, but in the quiet ruin of a woman whose own daughter had said enough in front of everyone. But I did not stay to watch the machine grind itself down. I was watching Imogen Sinclair walk to the foot of the dais and lower herself onto one knee on the cold stone in front of a copper-haired 4-year-old, her gown pooling around her, her face wholly undefended, and say, in a voice I remembered from one warm autumn a lifetime ago, hello, my name is Imogen. I'm told you draw your letters backwards. So did I, you know. For the longest time. Pia, who is braver than I have ever been, and who has none of my hard-learned habit of being small, considered the strange kneeling lady with the matching eyes with the whole serious attention of a 4-year-old. And then she said, you have my eyes, the way she had said it to a portrait a season before. And Imogen Sinclair laughed, that startled, unpracticed, undisciplined sound I had heard exactly once before, in a firelit study 4 years ago, over a backwards letter, and it broke and went to something else halfway out, and she said, I think you have mine, actually. And she looked up from her knee across the stone floor to where I stood, with the brass glass still warm in my fist, and there was no cold left anywhere in her face. The frost of the faculty melted clean off in front of 300 names, and I understood that I was looking at the warm woman again, the real one, finally and permanently thawed by the only fire that had ever reached her. and I crossed the last of the floor to my family. We left Ashmore that night through the great doors under the carved name, the three of us, and the name did not mean what it had meant when I walked under it in October with a suitcase and a secret. Imogen carried Pia, who fell asleep against her shoulder before we reached the quad, Copperhead on a black coat, and Mr. And I looked at the sleeping weight of my daughter on her mother's shoulder, and the woman I had loved and grieved and got back, and I said first. It was always going to be the first. It took a long time after that. The regents, the inquiries, the slow uncarving of a sovereign's 100 years, the careful public restoring of a name that had been stolen, and a translation that had been mine all along, and was, at last, in print, under my own name, the first time my name had ever been on anything. Imogen did not go back to being cold. The cold, it turned out, had never been hers, only a thing built around her by people who needed her useful. And once it was gone, it did not come back. She learned her daughter the way you learn a language you were born knowing and never taught. The backwards letters, the gray-eyed seriousness, the copper stubbornness that is mine. And some nights late, when Pia is asleep, the two of us sit over an old damaged hand the way we did in that first autumn. Two readers, the only two in the world who hear it the same way, and it is the truest thing I know. And it is ordinary now, which is the miracle. So that is how an assistant in a borrowed gown ended up being claimed, with the daughter they had all been told never existed, in front of the people who had been paid to keep her invisible. People will spend your whole life telling you what you are. An assistant, only an assistant, the help with ink on her hands. A reader who reads but does not get to say what it means. Do not believe a word of it. Somewhere there is a hand pretending to be calm, a powerful wrist pressing too hard over a lie about a living thing. And you may be the only one in the room who can feel it. Be quiet enough to read it. Be brave enough to say it out loud. Tear the cheque in half. Being right is not enough, and being believed is not enough. But being right and believed and unafraid, all three, in the same room, at the same hour, that is everything. And it is worth every year it costs you to learn to read it. A hand can be forged. What it meant cannot. Believe that hand. Night, in the quiet, after Pia was finally asleep between us with her backwards letters and her gray eyes, Imogen took out her father's black pen, the one cold weight from the cold family, the one that had fallen from her hand on the floor of the hall when she saw her daughter. And she opened my 4-year-old letter at last, the one she had never been allowed to receive, and she read it, all of it, the poor, frightened, hopeful hand of a 19-year-old telling her about a child. And when she was done, she was crying in the undisciplined way she had unlearned for 30 years and learned again for me. She did not say, "I should have come" or "I should have known," because we were both done with the things we should have done. She just folded the letter back along its 4-year creases and put her hand over mine on the table beside the brass glass and said the only thing left to say, the thing I am going to let her have the last of this story to say, because it is the whole of what I walked 300 miles and 4 years and 1 stone hall to hear. Read it to me again, slowly,